everyone, welcome to Collapse Astrology, and welcome back if you've been here before. Today's video is going to be a wild one, not for the faint of heart, as they say. We're going to talk about effective accelerationism and breakaway civilizations, big tech and Ayahuasca Fascism, non-human intelligence, and humanity's higher potentials. It all centers around Uranus and Gemini, the US Uranus return coming up in 2027 to 2028, and a theory I've been forming about the bifurcation of the deep state that may have happened at the end of World War II during the previous Uranus return. And while most of that probably sounds pretty dark, and it is, the interesting thing here is that we are dealing with very unstable energies, a system that is moving away from equilibrium. If you're familiar with chaos theory, you might know that unstable systems are much more susceptible to being affected by small inputs than stable systems are. This astrology and this moment in history are a wild card. And the last thing that I intend is for this information to leave you feeling like the future is already written, like we're destined to manifest the dark future that a teeny tiny elite very much does have in mind for us. So get yourself your popcorn, your tea, your comfy seat, maybe even a notebook or a journal, and let's dive in. First, a quick introduction. I'm Hummingbird, a mundane astrologer with a background in history and politics. And on this channel, we talk about how the astrology of the past and present corresponds to the compounding crises presenting themselves on the world stage today. If that's your jam, hit subscribe, join me for weekly Astro News live streams on Sunday evenings, and consider joining the channel membership and following me on Instagram. Now, this is the third video in a 3-part series on Uranus and Gemini, so you might want to watch the first two first if you didn't already. You could also just dive in with this one if you feel called, but just so you know, there's no basic level astrology in here. In the first video, I covered what I see as the main themes of the 7-year Uranus and Gemini transit: technology, telepathy, and information warfare. And in the second video, I talked about the history of US Uranus returns and how they correspond to the development of what we now call the military-industrial complex. Here, what we're really talking about is the combination of two transits: the third US Uranus return and the first US Pluto return. If you use July 4th, 1776 as the birthday of the US, the Pluto return technically peaked in 2022 to 2023, but a Pluto return is a transit better understood in decades rather than specific dates or even years. The Pluto return is the singular transit that really describes both the rising fascist tide domestically in the US, the surfacing of the white supremacist death cult that has always existed right under the surface of America's respectable veneer, and also the decline of the US and the West in general as leaders on the world stage. We are smack in the middle of a massive karmic reckoning here, and that, of course, is Pluto's territory. To learn more about the Pluto return, I'll link a few videos below, and you can also join me at the Revolution Rising Summit coming up in early August if you're watching this before then. The third US Uranus return is extra relevant to today's topic, though, because we're specifically talking about technology, a central theme of Uranus, and the military-industrial complex, a central theme of Uranus's 6th house placement in the US natal chart. I'm going to divide this discussion into 2 parts. First, we'll talk about the more mainstream part of the discourse, what Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor recently labeled Times Fascism. This is an ideology openly perpetuated by psychopathic billionaires like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp that essentially pushes for the accelerated collapse of Western civilization, leaving the vast majority of the population to die in the racial violence, climate crises, pandemics, and famines they know are coming, while a tiny elite escapes to isolated fortresses or eventually high-tech breakaway civilizations. Then I'll put on my tinfoil hat and discuss a current ebbing beneath the surface here, which most materialist leftists seem not to be able to handle, but which has got to be addressed: the realities of non-human intelligence and advanced technologies, at this point known almost euphemistically as UAPs. I have a theory about some parts of this subject which is still kind of half-baked, maybe inevitably, because as anyone who's ventured down the rabbit hole knows, it is not cut and dry in any way, shape, or form. but it's bubbling to the surface of public consciousness in multiple undeniable ways, and it also plays into the astrological archetypes precisely. So we're going to wade in, get a little messy with it, and see what insights the cosmos might have to offer. So, there is an article in The Guardian from April of this year by Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor titled "The Rise of End Times Fascism." And I wish I could read this entire article to you here because it is essential. Everything in it is essential for understanding the nature of what we're talking about here. So I'll link it below. I highly suggest reading it, maybe even go read it before coming back to this video if you feel like it, but I'll also try to summarize it here. As I mentioned before, many of the men holding unfathomable amounts of resources right now have embraced what Klein and Taylor call end times fascism. This is different from the original fascism of Hitler or Mussolini, and even different from the Zionist fascism carrying out the genocide in Palestine today, because all of those fascisms have or had something of a horizon. As Klein and Taylor write, quote, a vision for a future golden age after the bloodbath that for its in-group would be peaceful, pastoral, and purified. But the ideology of end times fascists includes a belief that global collapse is coming. And instead of using their wealth to try to usher humanity onto a different path, their choice is to save only themselves by building not just underground bunkers, but entire freedom cities, quote, hyper-capitalist democracy-free havens under the sole control of the supremely wealthy, protected by private mercenaries, serviced by AI robots, and financed by cryptocurrencies. These cities aren't hypothetical. Some already exist, one main example being Prospera, a charter city built by crypto capitalists on the island of Roatan off the mainland of Honduras. It's technically classified as a ZEDE, or Zone for Employment and Economic Development, which means it operates outside of the legal umbrella of the nation of Honduras, despite being technically on Honduran land. Donald Trump has called for the creation of freedom cities on federal land in the U.S., with the Presidio near San Francisco as one of the main spots that proponents have their eyes on. Right now, as far as I can tell, it's decently affordable to live in Prospera for Americans or anyone with dollars, not to mention, of course, crypto wealth. You have to apply and be accepted if you want to live there, and who knows what the actual internal qualifications are. But it's a gated city. And the point is that at some point, if there are market shocks, climate catastrophes, pandemics, or other violence and disasters, it could become extremely hard to get in. Also, it is not democratic. It's literally run by a corporation. As Klein and Taylor write, the advocates of this ideology, quote, have been championing what they call exit. The principle that those with means have the right to walk away from the obligations of citizenship, especially taxes and burdensome regulation. Billionaire venture capitalist and Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel is probably the most famous espouser of these views. In a 2009 essay for the Libertarian Cato Institute, which you can find linked below, Thiel wrote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." He added that since 1920, the vast increase in welfare beneficiaries and the extension of the franchise to women, to constituencies that are notoriously tough for libertarians, have rendered the notion of capitalist democracy an oxymoron. And there are many more. Alex Karp, current CEO of Palantir, Trey Goff, Prospera's chief of staff, billionaire VC Mark Andreessen, and Curtis Yarvin, an influential right-wing philosopher, are just a few of the others with immense wealth and power, as well as tight ties to the Trump administration, who have embraced and fleshed out and are now acting towards the implementation of this ideology. One of the main terms for it is effective accelerationism. You might have heard the similar phrase effective altruism around the time that Sam Bankman-Fried got in trouble for his crypto Ponzi scheme FTX. Basically, the word effective in both these cases is a way to say that the end justifies the means. The end is ostensibly a better world, though obviously that has a debatable definition, and the means to getting there under these philosophies happens to be consolidation of power and wealth by the people who are advocating these philosophies. So in the case of SBF and other effective altruists, they basically were saying, we'll make the world better by becoming billionaires and then saving the world with the money. We'll be altruists in what we do with our money, and it will be effective because we are better suited than governments or, 99.9% of humans to handle this wealth. Effective accelerationism says, not we are going to make the world better by being altruistic with our wealth and resources, but we are going to make the world better by accelerating a collapse of society. Of course, if you look it up, effective accelerationism doesn't define itself like this. It defines itself as techno-optimism, and there's a document called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto written by Mark Andreessen that is basically considered the same thing as effective accelerationism by its promoters. What they say they're about is doing everything possible to accelerate the development of technology because they believe that technology will solve all the world's problems. But in practice, this becomes a completely self-serving ideology. Because just like effective altruism, it's a belief system that justifies its promoters doing whatever TF they want, whatever benefits them personally, and saying it's for the good of humanity. In the case of techno-optimism, it justifies immense resource extraction, wealth consolidation, economic deregulation, and ultimately the movement away from democracy towards the corporate fascism that these guys want anyway. And so they say accelerationism means acceleration towards the singularity, acceleration towards humanity's inevitable merging with its own tech, which is called transhumanism and is literally another part of their fantasy. Think Neuralink or the option to get your Cybertruck key embedded as a chip in your hand. But in practice, and they know this, in practice, it's accelerating societal collapse. They know this, otherwise they wouldn't be building bunkers and fortress cities. Some of them, like Elon Musk, harbor fantasies of interplanet colonization, leaving a burning Earth behind for Mars and other worlds. Others are more focused on artificial intelligence and possibly some of the breakthrough non-Newtonian tech we'll talk about later. As Klein and Taylor discuss, effective accelerationism is essentially a secular version of the rapture. So it makes sense that its proponents are working side by side with fundamentalist Christians and religious Zionists. Basically, they are three different groups who each believe themselves to be the chosen ones, the select few who will survive when the rest of the world descends into violent chaos. And just like both the Christians and the Zionists, the effective accelerationists see it as their purpose not to avoid these end times, but to bring them on. As I discussed in part 2 of my election retrospective series, The Black Pill, the Trump administration is comprised of a mixture of these factions. Christian Zionists like Pete Hegseth and Mike Huckabee might not share a cosmology with Thiel and Musk, but their goals take them in essentially the same direction. Donald Trump himself may not share a cosmology with any of them. Honestly, I think Trump's cosmology mostly revolves around Trump, but I also think that he is being dominated. I don't really think that he is making many of the calls around his policies. Trump is too dumb, too senile, too out of it to be exercising much agency, especially with so many younger and extremely ideologically driven people around him. So coming back to the astrology, we're approaching the third US Uranus return. Uranus relates to technology, and the 6th house placement of Uranus in the US natal chart relates to military and industry. Part 2 of this series talks about the previous 2 Uranus returns and how they correspond to the evolution of the military-industrial complex, the weapons industry, the war machine. The most recent return especially, in 1944, happened at the end of World War II, when business interests whose profits had exploded during the race to develop nuclear weapons acted to make sure the cash would keep flowing even though the war was over. They pivoted to the Cold War, anti-communism, overseas covert action, and possibly black budget advanced tech. They enacted Operation Paperclip, Operation Gladio, and other projects that were in direct contradiction to the outwardly democratic, anti-Nazi facade the US was projecting. It was an extreme shadow version of Gemini, an extreme two-facedness that led to fractures at the highest levels of government and likely the assassination of the most popular American president since approval polls started in 1937. Today, as Uranus cycles back around, the astrological themes are re-emerging with stunning accuracy. Weapons manufacturing is pretty much the only industry America hasn't exported. It's all contracted to private companies with almost no government oversight and a huge amount of graft. The Gemini vibes are showing up in the military's recent contract with Palantir to establish a nationwide surveillance database to track and catalog US citizens. And just last month, 4 tech executives, one from Meta, one from Palantir, and 2 from OpenAI, were sworn into the US Army as lieutenant colonels, bypassing the rigorous training and years of service usually required to achieve that rank, with the explicit intent of making the force leaner, smarter, and more lethal. Despite Elon Musk's fallout with Trump, his XAI recently secured a $200 million Pentagon contract. And artificial intelligence is being integrated into all aspects of the military, including a lot of systems developed in Israel and, quote, tested on Palestinians. Okay, let's take a little stretch break here. Pause the video if you need some time to process, or if you want to go deeper into any of the sources. So before we move on, I want to reiterate something I've said a few other times. One spark of hope I've come across in my research into the deepest, darkest parts of Western history is that the white men who think they can completely control world events are always, always wrong. Although they cause immeasurable amounts of harm, they're always ultimately delusional about the reach and finality of their actions. They are narcissistic as They live in bubbles, which are often drug-induced, whether that's cocaine and opiates, the mainstays of Hitler and his inner circle, or the ketamine, various stimulants, and messiah complex-inducing psychedelics favored by our current tech bro leadership. There is no single cabal pulling all the strings, although there have been many small groups throughout history who wanted to think that they did. And the same is absolutely true with these guys. I'll get into more about why I think that later, including the Ayahuasca Fascism I mentioned up top. But just know, as much as I am emphasizing this apocalyptic ideology, I don't necessarily think things are going to go the way they expect. But this is where we're at. And honestly, if you don't want to go any deeper, that is fine. I considered making this next part a whole other video, but it feels like it needs to all go together. If you are ready for the full-on rabbit hole, let's go. Got the tinfoil hat. All right, tinfoil hat secured. I'm going to start with some disclaimers. First off, it is a little embarrassing to be a leftist trying to research the phenomena. Because I haven't come across a single podcaster, journalist, or other researcher speaking on this subject that isn't a simp for empire. It seems clear that anyone who starts to gain public traction gets contacted by the intelligence community pretty quickly, and while they'll often criticize how much has been hidden from the public, they will slobber all over themselves to point out that the people keeping these secrets are patriots and that it's so important that we protect ourselves from our adversaries. I watch Ross Coulthart on News Nation, and the next thing that comes up in my algorithm is Chris Cuomo talking about Iranian sleeper cells. So, I mean, it's embarrassing. It should be embarrassing for them, I guess, but it feels embarrassing for me to be listening to them. And it's just too bad that even the best, smartest, most grounded public voices on this topic have no materialist analysis and have done zero deprogramming of American propaganda. If you know of a UAP researcher who has some analysis of empire, please let me know in the comments. And second, when I say I'm a leftist, I basically mean I have a leftist or historical materialist analysis of what's happening in the world today and how we got here. I understand the world in context of Marx's contention that history is not just the result of drift or great men, but the result of material conditions and class struggles playing out over time. But I'm not an ideological Marxist, and I just couldn't be, because ultimately I'm not a materialist. Obviously, I'm an astrologer, And beyond astrology, I'm a very spiritual person. So historical materialism is one layer of my analysis, and I think it is a very essential one that so many people, both conservative and liberals, lack. But it's also not the only one. It's not the only framework I hold for understanding humanity and life on Earth. And I do think that some leftists get stuck here, especially if they're the type of people who really want a solid political ideology to call home. The leftist understanding of history is really the only one that names the horrific realities of the American empire and of European colonization before that, and how the past is still playing out today. So it's understandable that people want to find respite in the materialist ideology that comes along with the grounded leftist narrative. But going into this next topic, we have to leave traditional materialism behind, at least in the sense that we have to open to the possibility that there's more to existence than Newtonian physics. We have to open to the possibility that there might be other living intelligence here on Earth, and that it might be impacting and even managing much more of human affairs than we realize. And we have to open to our own spiritual potential, that we ourselves might be evolving past the limitations of our material senses, past the limitations of space and time. So I know I might lose some of you with that, but for those who are open, let's keep going. I've been studying deep politics for about 4 years. That's a term coined by Peter Dale Scott, a researcher who was a professor at Berkeley for 30 years, has written numerous books, and whose work kind of forms the backbone or tree trunk of any grounded narrative around the JFK assassination, the national crime syndicate centered in Las Vegas, the CIA's connections with and funding of Islamic extremist groups in West Asia since the 70s, and other extremely covert operations carried out by American intelligence. When you get into deep politics, you find a narrative completely hidden from mainstream public awareness. It gives you a completely different perspective on the way American corporate business interests have impacted world affairs, the way power has been exercised, and just how effing dark the reality is that we live in today. I've been down the UAP/non-human intelligence rabbit hole for a much shorter time, about 6 months. But I found something so interesting. It seems like a parallel narrative to deep politics, like they're two hidden historical threads running right alongside each other. They both originate in the 1940s. They both have their own casts of characters, which include the researchers, and their own milestones, important books, and cultural lore. They're both narratives that are still scoffed at by the mainstream, and people who are into one or the other can easily be written off as conspiracy theorists. Yet they seem to have almost no overlaps. There are a few people and groups that you hear about in both lineages, which I'm not going to get into in this video, maybe another time, but there aren't many. And they both seem to have a confirmation bias that almost eliminates the possibility of the other narrative being real. UAP folks because they are simps for empire, mostly privileged white people who have no desire to unpack their American exceptionalist programming, and the deep politics folks, sadly, because they're materialists, and their brains shut down the ontological shock brought on by the UAP question, collapsing it into the easy story of it's all an op. Well, if you dig into the UAP stuff, it quickly becomes clear that there is no way it's all an op. It is laced with psyops, absolutely, but there's no way that that's all it is. There's too much weird shit out there. Too many earnest whistleblowers, too many people, especially military people, who clearly would have preferred not to come across the information they did or to have had the experiences they had. It's UAP 101 to understand that 90 to 95% of unidentified flying objects can be identified as planes, satellites, planets, or other explainable phenomena. But there are others that can't. Because the military has the most advanced sensing and recording systems, and because they're the people observing the highest layers of the atmosphere and vast uninhabited spaces like the desert and the ocean, it's military people that are the most common witnesses to these phenomena. And it's not that I'm propping up military people as having more integrity than the rest of us, but you have to understand it is an incredibly difficult choice for a lot of these people to make honest public statements about what they've seen. Because in many cases, they're guaranteed to lose not only a job and an income, but a life path they have probably devoted years or decades to not to mention a full investment of their identity. So to try to keep things a little tight here, let me bring it back to astrology. I have a theory that during the last Uranus return, or during Uranus's last cycle in Gemini, between 1942 to 49, there was a bifurcation in the military-industrial complex, which, as I shared before, was being seeded during this time. As you know, if you're familiar with the topic, there's a lot of overlap between UAPs and nukes. We won't get super deep into it here, but they're very often seen around nuclear facilities. There were a lot of them witnessed in the desert in the southeast US during the nuclear testing that we were doing there in the 50s and 60s. There are many stories of them seeming to f with nuclear weapons. Those come from both the US and Russia, maybe other places as well. And there were also a lot of sightings after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 and the Fukushima meltdown in 2011. They seem to be not only interested in our nuclear weapons, but to have some sort of control over them, even if it's not complete control. Although historically, sightings do exist back before the 40s, they dramatically increased with the development of nuclear weapons. One theory is that as humans started messing with things on the quantum level, messing with the space-time continuum, beings from across the universe started showing up here to see what was going on. Another theory is that there are intelligences who were already here, maybe on Earth long before this iteration of humanity evolved. And while they haven't stopped the use or testing of nuclear weapons, they might be taking some action to make sure we don't completely destroy the Earth. Some researchers also think it might be something more like an immune response, or that there's some kind of cosmic control system that acts to keep technological development in check. So here's my theory. The side of the military intelligence world that was directly involved in the development and testing of nuclear weapons knew that there was something or someone else here. They didn't know what it was. I don't know if any human does even to this day, but they knew something weird was going on. And they knew it was messing with our weapons, maybe even our ability to use them. But then there was another side, the less hands-on side, the waspy side, like Alan Dulles and others, who didn't want to know that. Their brains were closed. They wanted to protect American dominance and colonial business interests. They wanted to maintain power for the elites, and they were just not interested on a deep subconscious psychological level in dealing with the ontological questions that inevitably arrive with the UAP phenomena. And it wouldn't have been very hard for them to avoid getting into it, because the people who were involved with it, seeing things, doing the science, making observations, especially the ones in charge, were also power-hungry narcissists. There's clearly tech involved that is more advanced than anything humans had, especially at that point. And these more open military intelligence people wanted that tech. They wanted to be the first ones to access it. They wanted to get credit for it. They wanted the power that came along with that. So they would have been happy to not share information with other power centers in Washington. And then, according to my theory, the deep state started developing along two separate parallel paths, with massive funding injections from taxpayer money fueling both of them. On one side, we have the coups, assassinations, economic shock therapy, funding of right-wing extremists, and other covert ops that you learn about when you study deep politics. And on the other side, you have something nestled into private aerospace companies and weapons manufacturers, kept secret by complex layers of security clearances, compartmentalized research and development programs, and internal need-to-know structures that keep all but a very select few humans from seeing the big picture of what's going on. There are lots of claims about the advanced technology that seems to be possessed by non-human intelligence, and some claims that humans have been able to reverse engineer it. There are claims of anti-gravity devices, jet-free propulsion, craft that are controlled psychically, psychotronic weapons like mind control weapons, which could be related to things like Havana syndrome, and free energy generators that could remove humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. There are claims of enormous underground military bases in the deserts of Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. What we know is that unfathomable amounts of money go in the direction of black budget programs, which are contracted out to private companies where there is truly no oversight from the top of the military hierarchy. This black budget sector is huge. It's estimated that almost twice as many people are employed by black budget military funding than are employed by the above ground federal government. And while I don't have any read on which claims are accurate, it's really naive to think that there is no secret tech development at all. So anyone who's into this area of study knows I'm barely scraping the surface here. I hope I scraped enough parts of the surface to give a general idea of the phenomena, which is one of the euphemisms you hear thrown about to describe all of this. UAPs are really just another euphemism because it goes way beyond unidentified aerial phenomena. There have been many weird sightings in the ocean or of craft emerging from the earth. There are countless abduction cases. It gets into quantum entanglement, telepathic communication, genetic modification, advanced technology, like I mentioned. It's freaking wild and it is all over the place. But one thing that seems clear is that it is emerging, just like other aspects of the deep state, into public consciousness, and there's no stuffing it back under the surface. Some other super interesting astrology has to do with Neptune in the United States natal chart. Neptune is in Virgo, right at the top of the chart, and of course the phenomenon is very Neptunian in general. How confusing and disorienting it is, how all-encompassing it is, how spiritual it is, how it pulls consciousness away from the earth and from groundedness. But the Virgo is also important because Virgo is the sign of applied physics, and so much of the bridge between human and non-human intelligence has to do with quantum physics and the quantum realm. And then guess when the US Neptune return was? 1938 to 1939. These were the years of the biggest breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, which were what led to the development of the first atomic weapons. Then the Neptune opposition was in 2021 to 2022, and around this time was basically when things started becoming mainstream, when some sort of disclosure effort went into effect. Disclosure can mean a lot of things, but basically in 2017, the New York Times published an article about UAPs, including military footage of truly unidentified aerial phenomena, and disclosed the existence of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a military program that had been around for a while before to study UAPs. And over the next several years, really up until now and continuing, there have been dozens of other whistleblowers coming forward, congressional hearings related to UAPs, and other mainstream press coverage. So this new wave seems very connected to the Neptune opposition. Okay, so we're winding down here, but there are still a few other things to cover, and we will cycle back to the first part of the video, the tech billionaires, the breakaway civilizations, and something we haven't touched on yet, but that is very relevant, which is China and their enormous technological breakthroughs in recent years, and in particular, the fact that they're now in space. So if you're not aware, China has made major advancements in pretty much all areas of technological development. They've got a high-speed rail system that dwarfs anything in the Western world. They're the leading developer and producer of clean energy technology. Their electric cars dominate pretty much everywhere except America and some European countries where regulations prevent affordable EVs from entering the market. They're producing airplanes, smartphones, and complex biotechnology. They have industrialized rare earth mineral refinement in a way no other nation comes close to rivaling. And also, they're creating satellite networks and pursuing other space-related projects, including landing an unmanned craft on the dark side of the moon, something that, at least according to official narratives, is an accomplishment never before achieved by humankind. It's pretty clear that once anyone ventures out to the far reaches of the atmosphere, not to mention the moon, they encounter some weird shit. Again, it's partly because, for the first time ever, high-tech methods of observation are being applied to these outer limits of the Earth. It's also because the development of nuclear technology, another area where China has been charging ahead, seems to lead not only to the appearance of orbs and other interactions with NHI, but also a change in the consciousness of the humans working intimately with subatomic manipulations. My guess, and this is something I've heard articulated by Diana Pasulka, a religious scholar turned UAP thought leader whose work is profound despite her also being a simp for empire, is that a large part of the impetus for the quasi-disclosure we've seen in the American mainstream is that the upper echelons of the American military and government know that China is now tuned into non-human intelligence as well. Even if these upper echelon figures have not come anywhere close to piercing the heart of the matter, they want China to know that they know it's there. And likely they want to give off the impression they have the advanced technology, whether or not they really do. Peter Thiel and his acolytes are spread far and wide throughout the UAP community. But my guess is that they are not the ones who truly have access to the advanced tech. My guess is that the ones who have access, who may have direct communication with non-human intelligence, and who may have successfully back-engineered some of the advanced tech, are nested in aerospace companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, but these individuals are not interested in being publicly known. They have a different conception of power than the power that comes from money and politics. They may also be waiting for the world to burn and for their breakaway civilizations to blossom, but their orientation is more cosmic and less egoic than the effective accelerationists. My read is that the effective accelerationists are jealous. They know this tech is out there and they crave the power that would come from it, but my guess is they're not anywhere close to actually accessing it. Because here's the thing. The more I learn about Thiel and the others, the more terrifying and blatantly fascistic their ideology appears. But also, the more I learn about them, the less I believe they will be successful in carrying out their wet dreams. The more I learn about them, the more they appear to be in a self-inflationary, drug-induced psychosis, a bubble that completely disconnects them from the larger reality here on Earth. I've been throwing out the term Ayahuasca Fascism, and here's what I mean by that. It's well known that psychedelics have long been in vogue in Silicon Valley. Tech bros head to Burning Man on their private jets, put on thongs and headdresses, and ingest consciousness-altering molecules in search of the next billion-dollar app idea, the next unicorn startup that will disrupt industries and leapfrog them ahead of their competitors. But psychedelics often give a person more than they bargained for, and I don't mean this in a good way, unfortunately. In a person with unexamined ancestral trauma, immense societal privilege, and an already out-of-control ego, psychedelics can quickly initiate a messiah complex, a psychological structure that reinforces a person's genius and unique societal role above all else. In a culture that already rewards sociopathy, and community spaces that have no ethos of shared sacrifice or mutual aid, but only a constantly reinforcing pattern of individuation, it's no surprise that a loosening of the mind and the energy body results in an even deeper solidification of narcissism. I also don't use the word ayahuasca generically. The tech bros don't typically do ayahuasca at Burning Man. They fly to Peru or somewhere else in South America where shamans who often share their spiritual corruption charge tens of thousands of dollars for retreats. And in ceremony, they encounter beings and frequencies who match their moral rot. Or even if a benevolent being tries to shake them loose, much too often the hungry ghosts in their field swallow the awakenings, turning them back into ego, reinforcing the psychological structures that tell them they're special, perhaps chosen, perhaps uniquely genetically qualified to lead humanity into its next era. So let's be clear about this. The chosen people mind virus has wormed its way from the Nazis, the Christian Zionists, and the Jewish Zionists into the effective accelerationists. They believe they are genetically chosen. They may have had experiences they interpret as genetic upgrades from beings in the psychedelic realms like the DMT machine elves. They may have had their crown chakras cracked open, a profound sense of mission shot through them, but with no grounding into the heart or the root. And again, the hungry ghosts eat the awakenings, turn them right back into ego. So let's be clear about this too. They are not the chosen people. They are not genetically superior. And all we need to do is look around us to know this. Destruction is not genetic superiority. Consolidation of resources is not genetic superiority. Letting the earth burn is not genetic superiority. If anything, advanced consciousness is mutual aid, selflessness, communal survival, love. Advanced consciousness is being demonstrated to us by the Palestinians who die under the heel of empire with the name of God on their lips. Advanced consciousness is demonstrated to us by all resistance to empire, past and present. It's present in small acts of kindness, the choices that go unrecognized by the algorithm, the sacrifices that release ego in surrender to something greater. And while I think us Westerners should be extremely careful about positioning China as the world's savior, which some leftists are apt to do, advanced consciousness may be being demonstrated to us there as well. This is not to idealize China, where authoritarianism is clearly present in some aspects of the government, surveillance is insidious, censorship is oblique, and ideological rigidity is as much as part of the culture, if not more, than it is in America. But I would propose that China's 1.3 billion person population and its 5,000 plus year old culture represents something emergent, something new, something almost impossible for white Americans uprooted from their ancestral homelands in the past few hundred years to even fathom. The effective accelerationists, while they may logically know about China's rapid technological development, are too trapped in their psychological bubbles to actually reckon with it. Just like a UAP fanatic who maintains a submissive obedience to the propaganda of empire, or a materialist who shuts down beyond human truths with the cope of it's all an op, Ayahuasca fascists have a hard stop in their brains around the idea of more advanced human civilizations existing on Earth at this time. They just cannot see what is really there. And that has always been the fatal flaw of fascist ideologies. Their gaze narrows around a chosen people, and they lose touch with the vastness of humanity and the earth. The drugs don't help. The concentration of resources also doesn't help. And so, while the direction that they're driving society is horrific, and the efficiency with which they're carrying out their plans is breathtaking, we shouldn't lose our wider sight. We should keep acting according to the directives of love, generation, the life-affirming force that powers us. We should trust that at least some of the non-human intelligences are benevolent and have the survival of our species in mind. We should release nationalistic programming ASAP and begin to root into our identities as citizens of the earth. I'm going to link in the description box several podcasts, some UAP related and some not, that go much deeper into the effective accelerationist ideologies and include lengthy quotes from these guys' own writings and interviews and so forth. Even UAPs aside, it's kind of bizarre how little attention this gets in mainstream progressive discourse, because these guys are so clear on what they intend to do, and now with Trump as their tool, they're right in the middle of doing it. But at the same time, maybe it is not so bizarre because it's natural that people are focused on the horrors in front of them. The genocides in Palestine and Sudan and the Congo, the ICE abductions, the creation of concentration camps on US soil, and the dismantling of the administrative state. But if you listen to Curtis Yarvin and the others speak, you realize how this is all part of their larger plan. To tie things back to the introduction to the video, a key component of chaos theory is the concept that unstable systems are more susceptible to big changes being caused by small inputs. It's like the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the ocean can be the determining factor in whether or not a hurricane forms on the other side. The archetype of Uranus is inherently disruptive, paradigm shifting, and unpredictable. Gemini, a mutable air sign, is also endlessly flexible, always ready to change directions or see things from a new perspective. So things are changing, and the effective accelerationists know it. They're leaning into it in the most evil way possible. But we can lean in too, with the knowing that all our small inputs are also affecting the system. I don't just mean the system of government or capitalism. I mean the whole paradigm we're existing in. The materialist, exceptionist, human-centric one. The one we've got to transcend if we want to stop the geocide the West is forcing on the rest of the world. And I've been saying for years now, astrology is not the place to look for answers to the question of what should we do. Astrology can't teach us how to grow food, heal wounds, or nurture healthy relationships. And I deeply believe that everyone has a unique role to play in the metamorphosis, which can't ultimately be determined by listening to anyone else. You have to look deep inside yourself to find your soul's blueprint, to know whether you're the wing cell, the brain cell, the eye cell, the liver cell, or whatever else in the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. So when I say I don't believe the techno-fascists will be successful, it's not because I have any idea how to beat them. And when I say we can change the system with our small inputs, it's not because I have any clue about the specifics of what we do. But it is because I believe in us. I believe in humanity's higher, brighter potentials. Fascism is brittle. Hate eventually eats itself. Beliefs about genetic superiority go against the reality that we are all a part of. The earth is ancient. Humanity is ancient. Our souls are ancient. And these fuckers are ephemeral, temporary, myopic. They won't win. So I hope what I can offer you in lieu of clarity about how we move forward is something that lays it out, especially the framework of astrology, its archetypes and timelines as new stories in which we can orient ourselves and grapple with our predicament. And B, my conviction, my belief in us on the deepest level. I have been to the underworld in my years of research, and as is common in mythology, I feel like I've returned with a gift. My faith in humanity's ultimate goodness has been strengthened, not weakened by everything I've learned. If you watched until the end, I am beyond grateful. Please like, subscribe, join the channel membership if you have a few bucks to spare, follow me on Instagram if you're over there, but more importantly, take care of yourself as you digest this information. Breathe, pray, hug your loved ones, put your feet on the earth, cry, ask your guides what you are supposed to do. I love you, and I'll see you next time.